Ladies and gentlemen, this program is a program on general semantics. It has to do with words and how we use them.
If you ask me, people talk too much.
Pardon me, Crashaw, but I think it would be more accurate to say that you talk too much. Furthermore, you never really know what you're talking about.
I do, too. Now listen to me, you overstuffed headache. When I talk about real things. I talk about solid facts, man. Solid facts.
You do not?
I do, too. I do. Oh, wait a minute. Hold it. Wait a minute.
Communication can be such strenuous matters. Well, it's time to introduce our distinguished colleague on this program, Dr. S.I. Hayakawa.
Thank you, Mr. Fudley. Thank you, Mr. Crashaw, for another graceful and charming introduction. Mr. Crashaw said that he talks about real things. As he said, I talk about solid facts. And since we are concerned in this series on semantics and communication with language and what language stands for, our next task, obviously, is to discuss the solidity of Crashaw's facts, or yours, or my own. The question is, what are we talking about when we talk? You say you talk about what you know, and I say I talk about what I know. How do you know what you say you know? Now, philosophers call this the problem of epistemology, but it's a much more practical question than that highly abstract term seems to imply. Let's talk, for example, about this apple. In the language of everyday life, we know this is an apple. We're pretty sure we know what we're talking about when we say apple. We experience it, we heft it, we taste it, and so on. And we're content to say, well, this is really an apple. Looking at it from another point of view altogether, let's look at it from the point of view of, let us say, the organic chemist, who sees this as a complex of hydrocarbon molecules of a variety of kinds, and acids and sugars and other organic substances. And if called upon, the chemist will diagram these molecules for you and say to you, that is what is characteristic of the apple. Or still look at it from another point of view, let's say that of the physicist. He will tell you that the molecules described by the chemist are in their turn analyzable into complexes of atoms. And atoms in their turn are composed of electrons and other such submicroscopic phenomena, and these electrons are in a perpetual condition of motion. Ultimately, says the physicist, this apple or this desk or a cow or a pig or a horse or a person is a complex whirl of electrons whose ultimate nature can only be inferentially known.
Say, if Doc thinks I put my $2 on the nose of a complex whirl of electrons, he's out of his mind.
Oh, do be quiet, Crashaw, and listen instead of interrupting.
I'm listening, but I wish he could put it in pictures for me. The words he keeps using make me nervous.
You're right, Crashaw. Perhaps all this can better be explained by means of a diagram. In a book called Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski, the founder of general semantics, there's a diagram of abstractions which helps us to understand better how we know what we know. Let me show it to you.
Hey, Doc, before you get over to that blackboard, there's something I gotta say right here. Now, if you ask me,
Nobody asked you anything.
Oh, get out of here. Now, here, look, Doc. If we're talking about words, right?
Yes.
Right. When I use words, I'm talking about things I know. Now, after all, seeing is believing, and I talk about real things like tables and chairs and horses and bar stools and bums like Fuddly and...
Obviously, Doctor, the poor simpleton lives in a dream world.
A dream world, huh? Well, I'll show you what I mean, you wooden-headed fugitive from a fireplace. I've been backing a horse named Snowplow, see? Well, yesterday, she comes home first in the Chicago Handicap, and I made a killing on her. I saw the race with my own eyes, and I got the money here in my pocket. I'll tell you, when I talk about a horse, I'm talking about a fact, not an abstraction. Believe me, Snowplow is a horse, and that's what I mean by seeing is believing.
But the trouble is, Crashaw, that most people are so much better at believing than they are at seeing. Let me go to the blackboard and show you what I mean. Here we have the diagram of abstraction created by Alfred Korzybski and described in his book Science and Sanity. Basically, it is a diagram to show the relationship between the human nervous system, the language systems that people use, and the realities which are talked about in language. Let's explain this diagram in terms of the mare Snowplow, upon whom Crashaw has won so much money. At the top of the diagram is a broken parabola with a lot of dots in it, and these dots indicate the characteristics. And the number of characteristics in the totality of Snowplow are so many that we shall never be able to exhaust them, because every event, every object is an extremely complex matter. And this is why this is indicated by a parabola broken at the top. Now, from that complex totality, that event, we shall call this an event, our nervous systems, through the act of perception, is able to abstract a certain amount through experience. And this we shall call the object. The objective level, then, is the level of human experience at which we see Snowplow, we are able to ride her perhaps, we're able to experience her, pat her on the head, and know her as actual physical experience. And this we shall call the object. At the next level, we may translate that experience into words by, let us say, giving a very complete description of Snowplow. So complete, in fact, that this description of Snowplow will distinguish her from all other horses on earth. Let's call this the descriptive level. Now, no matter how complete the description is, notice that we cannot get all of the object. And the object is not all of the totality of the event. So that even the descriptive level is an abstraction from the totality we experience. Next, we may have a label for this experience, simply horse. And notice that if we call Snowplow horse, we are failing to distinguish between Snowplow and all the other millions of horses there are on Earth. And so, the usual custom of calling things by a generic name such as horse is already an extremely abstract piece of linguistic behavior. But we can imagine also Snowplow being called an animal. This is still another level of abstraction. So abstract, indeed, that from the word animal we cannot tell whether Snowplow is a badger, a pig, a frog, or any number of animals. The word animal then leaves out characteristics of horses. The word horse leaves out characteristics of the specific horse. And each of these strings that are left dangling indicate the characteristics left out as we proceed to higher levels of abstraction. From animal, we might go on to still a more abstract term to describe Snowplow. We might say Snowplow is, among other things, an organism. And this would fail to distinguish Snowplow from fir trees and mosses and mushrooms, because they too are organisms. Or we might go even farther and say that snowplow is an instance of matter. And this would be abstract indeed. But notice that no matter how abstract the physicist becomes by talking about snowplow as matter, or no matter how abstract the chemist becomes by talking about the hydrocarbons of which snowplow is ultimately composed and so on, their abstractions are meaningful because they can be traced back along the chain of abstraction back to the experiential level. Now, the trouble is that most of us permit our higher level abstractions to float away from reality because I suppose we get intoxicated by the sound of our own voices. When we get into philosophical debates, talks about social problems, argue about race or religion, argue about economic problems and so on, all too many of us have a tendency to let our higher level abstractions wander around freely in space, totally disconnected from the objective realities for which they are supposed to stand. And this becomes a very, very entertaining kind of game, of course, but nevertheless, the traceability of the meaning back to physical experience is broken by virtue of the fact that we have broken the chain by paying no attention to whether or not we're talking about anything. Oh, it seems to me that there's an enormous number of examples of this sort of thing, but it seems to me that Fuddley was reading some highly abstract existentialist literature recently. Say, Fuddley, what is that stuff you were reading?
I found this passage from a modern philosophic work very exciting. It's from Karl Jasper's Reason and Existence, and it goes like this. Encompassing appears and disappears for us in two opposed perspectives, either as being itself, in and through which we are, or else as the encompassing which we ourselves are, and in which every mode of being appears to us. The latter would be as the medium or condition under which all being appear as being for us.
Thank you, Fuddley. That's a remarkable example of high levels of abstraction. Let's go over that again. The encompassing, did you say, appears and disappears for us in two opposed perspectives, either as being itself, in and through which we are, or else as the encompassing, which we ourselves are and in whose every mode of being appears to us? Good grief. Now, supposing I were to say, I disagree with Dr. Jaspers, and you, Fuddley, were to say, I agree with him. How would we ever decide who was right? There is no way, since these abstractions cannot be traced back through the diagram of abstraction back to the level of any kind of concrete experience. Perhaps a simpler way of saying this would be to say that I don't know what Dr. Jaspers is talking about, Fuddley doesn't know, you don't know, maybe Dr. Jaspers does, but he's certainly not letting anyone in on the secret. Wouldn't you agree, Crashaw?
Huh? Oh, I heard some noise in the background there, but I was too busy reading to pay any attention to it.
What were you reading, Crashaw?
Why, the racing form, of course. What else?
Well, certainly what I read makes more sense in the racing form.
Oh, yeah? Well, just listen to this. Start good, one driving, second and third the same. Roman count moved between horses while joining the leaders and responded to strong urging to last over booster racket. The leader improved his position boldly through the final quarter and just missed. Have it done and gave the leader on the turn, attained a slight lead near the furlong, and gave way in the late stages.
Incomprehensible, Doctor. Absolutely incomprehensible.
It is not. It's a perfect story of exactly what happened.
You know, Fuddley, as difficult as it may be for you to believe, Crashaw is right. Despite its highly technical vocabulary, the racing form does talk about events which are traceable down to the experiential level. Take a look at this. If this mystical and arcane collection of symbols is the record of the performance of a horse in a race. Can you read it, Fuddley?
Well, no, I can't
say that I can. Well, for crying out loud. It's as plain as the overgrown nose on your face. The race was held on October 19th, 1957. It was the fourth race at Golden Gate Fields. The distance was 6 furlongs, and the time of the winner was 1 minute, 10 1/5 seconds. The track was fast, and the closing odds were 6 to 5 on an entry. The horse carried 112 pounds with a 5-pound apprentice allowance. At the first call, the horse was fourth by 2.5 lengths. He was third by 1 at the pre-stretch, second by 2 in the stretch, and second by 2 lengths at the finish. The jockey was a Caro, and the post position was ninth. It was a claiming race with a claiming price of $5,000. The horse has a speed rating of 81. George Dead won the race and carried 114 pounds. Cupertino was third, carrying 117. Hat Lady was fourth. And in conclusion, there were 12 starters in the race. See? It was as simple as telling the time of day. Oh.
Thank you, Crashaw. Thanks very much. There is another element in this talk about abstractions. I'd like to call attention to the fact that most people tend unconsciously to slip from one level of abstraction to another, from lower to higher, and sometimes from higher to lower, without being at all aware of what they're doing. Here's an example. Supposing a mother reads in a book on baby care that the average baby of so many months old takes 8 ounces of milk at a feeding. Let's assume that she misreads the word average, which is, of course, a statistical abstraction based upon the study of a large number of babies who have taken anything from 0 to 16 or more ounces at a feeding at that age. She may react to the idea of the average baby by expecting her baby to take exactly 8 ounces at each feeding and get all worked up into a tizzy if the baby does not do so. This is the confusion of a statistical average, then, with a more specific level of experience. Well, let's take another example. Supposing a person feels himself quite unjustly treated or badly treated by 2 lawyers who talked a little too fast for him. His response to this situation may be, well, lawyers are like that. In other words, extending over the vast generalization of all lawyers what specifically applies in his experiences only to 1 or 2. This business, then, of freely jumping around the abstraction ladder and arriving at conclusions unwarranted by the level of abstraction at which the experience was first met is an all too common form of evaluative error. Let's go back to the diagram to illustrate this point a little bit more. Let's assume that at the descriptive level we have a statement like this, that Mary Smith got in at 1 a.m. last Saturday night. Let us say that's the descriptive statement of a given event. Some people, of whom it's been said that their chief form of exercise is leaping to conclusions, may proceed on the similarity between this and other situations with which they've been acquainted to an inferential level of abstraction, the next level, let's call it inferential, and conclude that Mary must have been drunk. This they fail to bother to check back to see if it connects up with the objective level. They just say it, and having said it, they believe it because they did say it. From there on, they go to still higher level of abstraction like this. Let's call this the judgmental level. At this level, they say something like, Mary is a no-good tramp. and they feel that they have said something conclusive and important about Mary. From here on, the jumps on the levels of abstraction are perfectly incredible that some people are able to make. They say next, well, that's the younger generation for you. And then they may say next, what's the world coming to? And so on the basis of a single instance of unjustifiable assumption because, let us say, Mary wasn't drunk at all. There's no connection between the higher level abstractions and the things that are being talked about. Now, in other words, this business of being able to trace back your inferences, your judgments, and your higher level abstractions back to the objective level, which in turn stands for some kind of process, is a matter of utmost importance in attaining clarity in one's thinking and adequacy in one's evaluations. But all too unfortunately, people just leap freely about from level to level on this level of this diagram of abstractions without stopping for a moment to think what they're doing. Now, there are some people who really believe that they never do, that they talk nothing but facts. But we've already seen that fact itself, the term fact itself, is an ambiguous term, and we're not always sure that people are being accurate when they say they talk nothing but facts. Now, Crashaw, for example, he says that he talks nothing but facts. Isn't that right, Crashaw? And you believe yourself when you say that, don't you?
You're darn right I talk only about facts, and I'll show you what I mean. You know, the other day, a guy moved into the house next to mine. Well, I've noticed that this guy stays up late at night, and there's always a light burning, see? Then when he comes out of the house, he always walks along with his head down, like he was lost in a fog or something. Well, from these facts, I'll tell you another one. That guy's real sneaky. But I can see right through this to the facts. The guy's really a cop, see? And he's been planted there just to spy on me.
Why, that's fantastic. You're talking about my brother Dudley, the philosopher. He's the man who moved next door to you. He's writing a book, and that's why the lights are on so late.
Oh, well, I knew there was something sneaky.
That's exactly what I was talking about, Crashaw, you dope. From now on, I hope you'll straighten out and evaluate right. Well, let me then summarize the intention of today's presentation. Essentially, all we know is abstractions. Experience, which is itself an abstraction, and generalizations at various levels from that experience. We must remember that the more general a statement is, the greater is the number of characteristics left out from the specific events and things we are talking about. And then there's the question of fact. There's no simple, unambiguous definition of the word fact. Facts, too, exist at many different levels of abstraction. Let's go back to Crashaw's horse, Snowplow. Snowplow, the horse, as a specific individual known to her handlers, the men in the stable who take care of her. To them, Snowplow is a fact at a very intimate level. The Snowplow that Crashaw puts his money on is a more abstract Snowplow, a horse on which Crashaw places $2 bets, not on the basis of seeing Snowplow except from great distances by means of binoculars or riding her, but reading about Snowplow in his sports pages and in the racing form. But to Crashaw, Snowplow is a fact, and he made some money on that fact. But Snowplow and horses like her are facts, too, at other levels of abstraction. Think of what Snowplow means to the opponent of gambling, to whom Snowplow is a very evil and discomforting fact indeed. To the state tax collector who collects on all the bets placed at the races. To the economist, to the biologist, to the geneticist, to the chemist or physicist. Each of these people treat Snowplow as a fact, but their facts may be said to be at different levels of abstraction. And the big point to remember is that all our statements and perceptions are abstractions. And to know at what level of abstraction we are operating at any given moment in all our talking and thinking is essential to the clear functioning of our minds. Now, why is all this important to us? Let me talk specifically about the problems of the white-collar classes. The people like myself and many in my audience who spend their days talking, making marks on paper. Clerks, salesmen, preachers and teachers, lawyers, advertising men, executives. We are all immersed all day long in abstractions. Can you imagine this? That carloads of wheat are grown, they are harvested, they are put in sacks and loaded on trains and trucks and moved from Kansas all the way to New York. And what do we do about all this vast activity? We in the white-collar classes share in the process only to the extent of making little marks on paper. This then is a problem that especially confronts the white-collar classes. As Thomas Hornsby Farrell says in an essay, which is reprinted in Irving Lee's book, The Language of Wisdom and Folly, the white-collar classes have to live, for the most part, by symbols instead of things real to the senses. They work all day with the biggest and bulkiest things in the world in the way of commerce, the vast herds and flocks of mountain and prairie, the food and fiber of millions of acres, the enormous tonnages of mines and mills. To be manageable at all, every bulky reality has to be pulled down to something it isn't, some tight little representation of itself, a symbol, a cryptogram, such as converting 10,000 sheep into a flicker of teletype. It follows that in handling such volumes of physical material by spirit rather than sense, the mind feels a bit guilty. It feels it ought to know more about the outside world. It ought to make some effort to connect up reality behind the symbol. But you can't go off to Butte to learn about copper or off to Kansas to learn about wheat, so you come to rely more and more on the imagined concepts of what the outside world would be like if you ever brought them into the field of sensation. The imagined concepts are fortified no end by information services, which presume to tell us in one paragraph what Iowa is thinking or what California wants. But such summarization carries the mind not closer to reality, but farther from it. The net effect is to increase rather than diminish our reliance on symbols. Therefore, it behooves us all to be aware of the process of abstraction and to know at what level we are dealing.
Well, that was kind of interesting, wasn't it? Tell me, Fuddly, what do you know?
Abstractions, my dear fellow. That's all that you or I or anyone else knows.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But what about that brother of yours? You know, the one who's a cop?
He's not a cop.
Yes, he is, too.
He is not one of them.
This is National Educational Television.